My name's Josh Novick, and I am a licensed clinical professional counselor.
What inspired you to get into the mental health field?
There are two distinct instances that encouraged me to get into the mental health field. The first is my own experience within the mental health field, and that is dealing with some mental health challenges as a teenager and seeking out therapy as a teenager. And then my other experience and opportunity came to be in mental health field when I was a teacher on the west side of Chicago. I was having a really hard time dealing with the students who were walking through and coming into school through some really traumatic experiences. And I just didn't have the skills necessary to counsel them in the way that I wanted to. And so as I was teaching, I went back to get my counseling degree. And that was really how I jumped headfirst into the mental health field.
And then from all that, how did you create your own practice?
It has been quite the long journey. I had the opportunity to be a school counselor on the west side of Chicago for a couple years. Incredible experiences, and as I've shared with you, there was a good deal of vicarious trauma that happened, that I had to deal with just by nature of being in those experiences and those environments. I also became specialized in gun violence trauma work, mostly working with individuals after they had been involved in gun violence. However, I also worked on prevention as well. And around COVID, I made the transition to the suburbs, and I was working in private practice. And then the Highland Park 4th of July parade shooting occurred. And that was a really changing the trajectory of my life moment. The evening of the 4th, I received a phone call asking for some help. I didn't know what I was going to be walking into. And basically what me and some other organizers were able to do is to set up a community counseling center that existed for over 5 days after the incident. We saw hundreds, if not thousands, of community members. We had hundreds of volunteer therapists come out. And I was so honored to just be a small part of the leadership that helped that come together. And that brought me back into schools. And so I was right back into the school world, thinking now, big picture, how does gun violence affect our students? How does it affect us every day? And that's really where my company, my organization, has been born from. Is we at Trust and Grow help organizations and schools recover and repair from gun violence trauma and the ripple effects of such. And so my work has really been grounded in not only the recovery and response aspect of gun violence and trauma, but also preventative efforts. And that leads into another organization that I am a part of that I want to definitely make sure I tell you about. And that's Teachers Unify to End Gun Violence. And that's an organization that I volunteer with and I'm really passionate about. They're very similar to a Moms Demand Action or an Everytown. However, their messaging is specifically designed towards educators. So even though it is Teachers Unify to End Gun Violence, I am a school counselor by trade, and I am an ambassador to that to that organization. And so it encompasses educators from teachers to bus drivers to cafeteria workers to paraprofessionals, knowing that those of us in the education space experience the active shooter drills, the threat of gun violence, the after effects of gun violence in different ways than the rest of, America, quite frankly.
You just said the after effects of gun violence. How does, after the gun violence, how does that affect students?
So one thing I talk about very frequently is the window of tolerance. And essentially everyone knows the window of tolerance. They just don't know how it's that exact name. Basically, it's, if you're having a really good day and you knock over your water bottle and it spills everywhere, you're going to be like, okay, the water bottle spilled. All right, I'm going to clean it up. If you're having a really, really rough day and you knock over your water bottle, it might cause you to scream out an expletive. It might really make you upset. And the idea behind that is, in essence, the window of tolerance, right? In one of those scenarios, you were in a positive state of mind, you were in a regulated state. In one of those other scenarios, you were dysregulated, you were seeking regulation. And so that is a very trite way of describing the window of tolerance, but that is something that we use after gun violence because we can't expect individuals to immediately return to their window of tolerance. In fact, it takes a long time and really some hard work so that our students, our families, our parents, our human beings can get to a place where they can return back to their window of tolerance and try to move forward with their lives.
I went to high school in the late 90s, and there were school shootings, but you didn't hear about it that often. And now I have two girls who are 11 and 7, and every few months they have active shooter drills. So with that, is it important to know the challenges for people, understanding what people are going through?
Yes, I think unless you are a parent or a student or an educator, it's really hard to understand the exact pressures and the exact vicarious trauma, for lack of a better term, that occurs by being around and a part of these drills and these headlines. Right? We are all, as Americans, many of us are on social media. We are all exposed to what feels like a near daily barrage of news headlines of school shootings. You layer that into addition of shootings that occur in other public spaces, and then you layer that in on top of what we now have as active shooter drills, and it becomes really a really challenging situation for students not to think about it all that frequently, and for parents and teachers not to think about it all that frequently. And so that's why I'm so heavily involved with Teachers Unified to End Gun Violence, because this is so draining on our system, on our children, on our parents, on our families, on our educators. There is so many resources and energy and effort that go into preventing and dealing with the after effects of our gun violence epidemic in this country that could be resourced in such more productive ways should we not have this issue to tackle. And so, I think it's a unique identity for individuals that are affected by this, but those that are affected are extremely affected.
How does it feel for you to be working with students and teachers on this?
It's tough. It feels rewarding in the sense that I can help walk students and staff and families along their journey to recovery. Certainly not guiding anyone. I'm walking along with them. And it is extremely frustrating to have to continue to be called to action in these environments. For example, I'm part of a crisis team that Teachers Unify has created that is organized in response to school shootings. I am honored to be a member of that team. I am privileged to be a contributor. And at the same time, I hate that team exists. And I hate how often that team gets called upon. And so, it's a bit of a juxtaposition for me in that I enjoy my work in that it's needed, but I, at the same time, really wish it wasn't needed. It would be great for my inbox to be empty, because that would mean that we have not had any shootings. And so that would be a wonderful experience for me to have. Sadly, it has not been that way.
When you work with students, what are some of the other challenges they are facing?
So some of the big challenges is all of our students are human beings, and many of them were dealing with challenges long before gun violence or long before any of these incidents. And so what we have found is that individuals who are then exposed to these traumatic experiences, it certainly exacerbates previous conditions and previous issues, while also creating, new problems in the post-traumatic stress disorder. So it can be really tricky because sometimes this is, the first experience with some real negative emotions that an individual has been dealing with, or it could be just another traumatic incident in a long line of a traumatic history. So it's really dealing with students on a case by case basis. And then I will share with you the other thing that I have found with working with survivors that's challenging is the rate at which society seemingly moves on. We know that these communities, these schools, these families are forever impacted by the ripple effect, by either directly or by the ripple effect. And that does not end when the news cycle has moved on. That does not end when the cameras and the news articles have ceased. And that can be a really challenging space to be in, not only because does the spotlight move on, but sometimes the resources move on as well. And so there can be a messaging that's sent out that you should be moving on when we know that is not necessarily how human beings recover from trauma in such a linear way. So all of those things put together can cause some real challenging times in a young person's life.
What do you do to help your own mental health?
That's the $1 million question. So first and foremost, I am proud to say that I am sober. I have been sober for over 4 years. That is probably one of the most important gifts that I give myself every single day, and it is certainly one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle to my overall emotional wellness. And I am proud to tell people about that. It is certainly something that I work on every single day, and it will always be something that I live and struggle with, but that I'm proud to help others walk through and with as well. That being said, I also really enjoy being a father. It has certainly shaped my perspective on a lot of different, worldviews. And so spending time with my son is really the greatest way for me to fill my cup. And also, another way that I really enjoy filling my cup and making sure that I'm staying emotionally healthy is by volunteering. I think it's an incredible way for us to give back in our local and immediate communities. And that can look in a myriad of different ways. And so, for example, one of the ways I volunteer is at a local organization called Lamb's Farm. And it is it's an institution that houses individuals with developmental disabilities and helps them find jobs and housing and all sorts of incredible opportunities. And so that's a place that I've found that I really enjoy volunteering on the weekends. And so my charge to, those out there wondering how can I work on my own mental health is get outside, go volunteer, go follow your passion as much as possible, and lean into that, because those are the things that fill our cup. And these days our cup is depleted quickly, and our window of tolerance for many of us is significantly narrowed, and we need all the experiences that we can get to expand that window back open.
What are some of the things you've learned from your son?
Some of the things I've learned from my son is, number one is we are not in control of our children. I have learned. Listen, I have gotten the phone call from daycare or from school, that your son was displaying some behavior that was, inappropriate, and that was, something that I'm very versed in, making calls to parents. And, when I was on the other receiving end of that phone call, it really helped me understand and shape my perspective on what mental health and mental wellness looks like, not only as an adolescent, but also as a parent, and how there are different factors that go into your mental health and wellness at different stages and seasons of your life. And so he certainly taught me that. And the other thing that he's taught me is just to embrace life day by day and truly enjoy the little things. His favorite thing in the world to do is come home from daycare and run the bases at the nearby baseball field. It lights his light up to just go run the bases. And so we have come to a lovely pattern and routine of getting home and running the bases. And that is just one thing that I do every single day that brings him immense joy and therefore brings me immense joy. And it doesn't take a lot of time and it doesn't take a lot of effort, but it's a consistent, joyful activity that we bring into our lives.
What advice would you give anyone going through a tough time?
The advice that I would give anyone going through a tough time is try to use your resources and your community as much as possible. And as challenging as that may be, reach out for help. There are so many different avenues of receiving help in this day and age that I would encourage someone to use the method that works for them. There are opportunities like calling 988. There are drop-in centers. There are living rooms. There are private therapists. There are hospitals. There are lots of different avenues and on-ramps to receiving care and receiving support. So the number one thing I would recommend, and my advice would be, as challenging as it is, really try to find some piece of support, some resource that works for you. That would be my ultimate piece of advice. And lean into the community, lean into the support systems that you already have. And then the second piece of advice I would have is lean into what drives you, lean into what brings you joy. We all are great at something. I truly believe we are all masters or becoming masters of something. And so as such, I believe that's something that we can harness our energy into for more productive uses. And that way we are really carrying that energy in a way that isn't harmful to ourselves, but rather helpful to where we're trying to go.
And you've done so much to help people in the past few years, but where do you want to see your mission in the next, say, 3 to 5 years?
So my mission as a human being would be to see that there is no longer a need for active shooter drills, for school shooter protocols, for me and for Trust and Grow Consulting to be called to a community that has been affected by gun violence. My goal, my vision is to continue to be a part of Teachers Unify to end gun violence and do just that. Work with all stakeholders on all sides of the aisle to end gun violence so that my role in this doesn't have to be dealing with the aftermath and the ripple effect of school shootings. I want to be in a different space. I want to help work with teens on teenage development and parents on what their teens are going through, independent of gun violence trauma. And so my goal for 3 to 5 years is to continue to build educators, have educators join Teachers Unify, to continue to amplify that message, to continue to have programs in schools reach out to Trust and Grow and help work on preventative programs. And really, as I've continued to say, continue to build your village, continue to build your community, lean into the people that you surround yourself with. Something that I often say is crisis response begins long before a crisis. Those relationships are established, those trusts, those systems are often established long before a crisis occurs. And so you tap into your local resources, become aware of what's around you. You'd be very surprised at what is available to you if you do some digging. And so those would be some of my visions for the future.
How can people reach out and learn more?
There's 2 ways that people can reach out and learn more. first, I would encourage them to go to trustandgrow.org. That is my website. And then the other website that I would encourage teacher or anyone who's in the education space to go to is teachersunify.org and sign up for our information. Even if you're not willing to donate any time or money, I think just being kept in the loop of what teachers and students and parents are going through can really help inform the discourse and truly make change.